So what we're going to look at, I know I skipped over an elasticity, but the reader was really wordy, and I promise I have like a 7-slide PowerPoint on inelasticity and elasticity that I could do with y'all, and it provide you the same information, just less wordy and better graphics. So what we're going to look at is when the government gets involved in our market economy. And y'all have to realize that our government is actively involved in our economy. We are not a perfectly competitive economy where the government stays out, is laissez-faire. Well, we're going to see that our government does come in and put price controls. They set minimum and maximum prices that affect our economy. So one here is like the food crops, like with milk. Okay, they provide, they could put a price control saying that milk cannot go over a certain rate. But the one that y'all are most familiar with, and I'm not going to read all of this, I'm going to give you something that you're actually familiar with. A price control that's a minimum price is minimum wage. Okay. Another price control is like in major cities, like in New York, like rent can get really crazy. So the government of New York realized, well, if rent is $3,000-$4,000, how are we going to get regular workers, like people to work in fast food, people to be our janitors, to come here? And so there's rent control. It's the minimum price. Also, there is maximum prices. Usually we don't see that as much, but what we're going to look here is that rent control. And this is called a ceiling. And I know this looks weird because the ceiling is a cap. They said that it can't go over this price. So all of a sudden, we see at that ceiling that the suppliers, they're like, okay, for $300 for rent, they don't want to offer a lot of places. And over here, if I was in New York and I could find a place to live for $300, there's going to be a lot of demanders. And so this leads to a shortage, that a lot of people want that rent control place, but the suppliers are not willing to supply it. So a rent ceiling or any type of ceiling will always be below equilibrium, and it will lead to a shortage. What we're going to look at is a price floor. A price floor is a minimum. And we know minimum wage is like this. So like, let's just say minimum wage was $8. Well, the suppliers, they could have paid someone, if we're really at the market going price, they could have paid someone $5. I know it says price bushel. I'm just using minimum wage because y'all are used to this. But if they could have paid someone $5 and now they're having to pay them $8, they don't want all that supply of labor. So they're going to demand less. And so this leads to a surplus. Okay, I know I just said suppliers are the ones who are demanding here because they're looking at that labor, and the demand and the labor is now that supply. A lot of people are going to be willing to work at $8 versus $7.25, so the supply of labor is really high. But the demander, which is the business, doesn't want to pay $8.25 because that's a loss of profit. So we have this floor that leads to a surplus. Other things that the government gets in the way of our competitive markets is through taxes. When the government taxes either businesses or consumers, this can lead to them interfering in our marketplace. Okay, so this is just, man, cell phones, like, I don't know if you've ever looked at your cell phone bill, but like there's so much taxes that are assessed by the state, the federal, the local, that we're going to see that it actually leads to problems. So if, I'm just going to use this one. If there was a tax on suppliers, and I don't know why they're not labeling S1 and S2, all of a sudden this was our original equilibrium and they tax them, so they're supplying less. Okay? So anytime we tax something, the supply will decrease, our demand will decrease. Okay, so this is why I always think during a tax-free weekend, there's no taxes. What happens to people's demand? It increases. So I'm going to skip through all of this. Okay, and last thing, international trade. International trade actually helps our supply curve shift out to the right, and it allows for, when it shifts out to the right, it allows for our prices to decrease. Okay, so what we're going to look at is a production possibilities frontier. When we start trading with other nations, we are going to see that we are going to look at specialization. So in this production possibility frontier right here, Robinson, he could produce 24 coconuts and 0 fish. The opportunity cost, if he produces all coconuts, he's giving up fish. I'm going to look over here at point A. At point A, he's willing to make 15 coconuts, but he's only going to make like 3 fish. Okay, so the opportunity cost of moving from 24 to 15 was about 9 coconuts, right? He gave up to produce 3 fish. So again, opportunity cost is what you are giving up. If he was producing 24, his choice was to make all 24 coconuts and 0 fish, his opportunity cost is fish. When he moved from 24 coconuts down to point A, where we're making about 15 coconuts, he's losing 9 coconuts, right? But gaining 3 fish. This is his choice. Okay, we're going to look at this next guy's production possibility frontier. Whoa, he could make way more than Robinson. Wow, right? Okay, so this guy, he could produce 36 coconuts and 0 fish. Or at point B, he could produce 19 coconuts and like 17 fish. He could produce way more than Robinson, right? But the thing you have to understand is that Robinson can't produce both because of scarcity of resources. And this is why trade with other nations will allow them to actually have more. And so there's going to be gains from trade, okay? We're going to see that first off, if nations are trading, they're no longer isolated. They no longer want to go to war with each other. We are going to see their production possibility frontier will actually shift out to the right. And we're going to look at the opportunity of trade, that we actually increase what we are trading. And I talk about this in my course, but we're not, why don't they give us how to calculate trade? Right. They don't, because it's right here. So we could look, I'm going to go back to these 2 charts because I have to talk about absolute and comparative advantage. So looking at here, if I look at Robinson and Crusoe, right? I think it's Crusoe. Who has the absolute, who could produce the more coconuts? Is it Robinson with 24 or Crusoe with 36? Definitely Crusoe, right? He could produce way more. But he would only produce that. Let's look at fish. He could produce 36 fish, right? And this guy could only produce 8. Who has the absolute advantage? Crusoe. He produces the more. But when we look at comparative advantage is looking at who should specialize. And so let me go down to comparative advantage, and we're going to do some calculations. I don't know if the resource asks you to look at calculations, but comparative advantage is looking who can produce it at the lowest opportunity cost, giving up the least. And so we're going to see, did they ask you to do that? Did they ask you to calculate? No, they did not ask you to calculate. They didn't ask you to calculate, but that's the only way you could learn comparative advantage is who loses the least. And so I know Miss Miner in there knows how to do comparative advantage, but I'm going to shut this video off and I'm going to show you how to do that based off the numbers of what is going on in this graph. And this graph is just, I need more than 10 minutes to do that.